Out shortly.
Order, order. I would like to start this first session of the International Development Select Committee on the FCDO and civil societies. I think we all have an understanding of what civil societies are and are all very grateful for the work that they do in our communities. The FCDO defines civil society as uncoerced human association or interaction by which individuals implement individual or collective action to address shared needs, ideas, interests, values, faiths and beliefs that they have identified in common, as well as the formal, semi or non-formal forms of association and the individuals involved in them. Civil society is distinct from states, private for-profit enterprises and the family. It's quite a clunky definition, but I think it sort of gets us in the space that we want to be. We're having two sessions today, and if I could ask the panellists on our first session to introduce themselves. So I am looking. Ibrahim-Tanko, I wonder, we're told you prefer Tanko, so could I ask you to introduce yourself and your organisation to begin with, please? I think you're on mute, Tanko.
Sorry. Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim-Tanko. Amidu. I'm the Executive Director of the Star Ghana Foundation. Star Ghana Foundation is a national center for the promotion of active citizenship and local philanthropy to achieve transformational change in Ghana. It transitioned out of a 10-year program of support funded by a number of donors led by DFID as it then was. And then at the end of the 10 years, we transitioned the program into the Star Ghana Foundation to continue to support civil society in Ghana in achieving good governance and access to services for all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nadine, could I ask you to introduce yourself and your organisation, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Nadine Tunasi. I'm originally from the DRC and came in the UK 20 years ago as a refugee, and now live here, rebuild my life in this country. I work for an organization called Freedom from Torture, actually an organization that helped me receiving therapy and rehabilitation, and I work there, currently managing the survival activism network in this organization. We are a campaigning organization, but we also make sure that we speak against torture, the impact of torture, but also ensure that torture survivors receive rehabilitation. As a result of my campaigning work, I was appointed in 2019 by the UK government as a survival champion of the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, as my also connection with the FCDO. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And finally, Sita, we can just about see you, but you're on mute, so let's see if we can hear you.
Hi, I am Channsitha Mark.
We can hear you. Hello, Sita. So introduce yourself and your organisation, please.
Thank you. I'm Channsitha Mark. You can call me Sita. I am working with ActionAid Cambodia as a country director. ActionAid is an international organization that work with women and girls living in poverty. And we dedicated to end violence against women and girls and changing life. Our vision is for the world free from poverty and injustice, which everyone enjoys the right to a life with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. We admire what you do hugely. I'm going to pass to my colleague Virendra for the first questions.
Hi, Nadine. Why is FCDO, support for civil society organizations, important?
Thank you very much. I think that the work is very important is because, civil society organization, if I can say, on the ground and get to really understand the impacts of, what is going on in the conflict zone. I've said in my introduction, I'm, from the DRC. My country has been at war for many years. As far as I can remember, I've always seen organization in my country doing some sort of work. So I think it's really important to have civil society organization getting to see the impact of what is going on, because they are able to also sort of link with the population really in the heart and what is going on, and sometimes even in the rural example. And I also think that the FCDO is very important because as being part of the UK government, the UK is perceived to be a leading country, and people just don't admire the leadership because country have a better system, but it's also because, you know, country can set an example of how, you know, to conduct certain things. And really working with civil society organization is really important, because country, civil society that are delivering the work on behalf of the FCDO can actually be inspired by the model. But as you are, you know, as a leader, people have high expectation. You know, they expect, obviously, not just to have funding, but they also expect to learn from that country. So I think for me, what I've seen over the years is the leadership that is very important, that which country feels that they can be inspired and be part of and learn from it.
Thank you. Tanko, how could the FCDO better place civil society organizations at the center of decision making?
Thank you very much. I think in Ghana, I have seen moves towards putting civil society at the center of the work of FCDO. Much has been achieved, but there's still more to be done. I mentioned in my introduction that Star Ghana Foundation came out of a 10-year program of support that David, as it then was, and other donors put together to strengthen civil society in Ghana to achieve good governance and better delivery of public goods and services. And I think that highlights one of the ways of doing this, the long-term engagement and support to civil society organizations. I think very short-term support, whilst they may achieve some results, do not lead to sustainable results, do not build the kind of relationships that enable civil society organizations to work with various stakeholders to achieve sustainable results. I think beyond the provision of grants, which is important as it is, FCDO can also help to broker relationships, both internally within the country, but also externally between civil society and other stakeholders towards, you know, addressing the drivers of poverty, exclusion, inequality in the countries. And I think that is something that in Ghana, FCDO has done quite well, providing spaces and fora for civil society engagement with government agencies, and engagement with private sector and other, you know, development partners. That's quite important. And the third is around the whole issue of the capacity strengthening in terms of bringing in expertise, in terms of access to information, but also in terms of involving civil society in the strategic thinking, planning, and implementation. Involvement in itself is capacity strengthening. It strengthens capacity, and I think that is one of the ways that this can be done. So the grants, the brokering of relationships and provision of spaces for civil society engagement with other stakeholders, and the capacity strengthening. I think an area that is beginning to emerge that I think is quite important is also how FCDO supports, you know, human rights defenders, you know, within the country who may be at risk of being targeted as individuals or as individual organizations, but because they've raised controversial issues or they go against government policy. Over.
Thank you. Sitha, how regular is your engagement with the FCDO and what form does it take?
Thank you. ActionAid Cambodia got the projects, you know, implementations funded from FCDO through our working relationships with ActionAid UK. So we got the funded for the women's led alternative in climate change in Cambodia. And with this project, we work closely with ActionAid UK and FCDO. We have a regular meetings and start the implementation of the project, but have monthly meeting very closely with ActionAid UK and also communications on the implementations of the work. ActionAid Cambodia work closely in designing of the project, and it's very, very collaborative process that we work with the UK office and our partners on the grounds and also the community to kind of like design and develop the actions. And our work is to ensure that the support from the FCDO funded is strengthening and support the women to do their work on the ground and continue to kind of like showcase their leaderships in providing the support to the community that is needed. And also especially to kind of like influence in terms of women's needs and voice in the policy and also in the subnational and national government of Cambodia. We also kind of like, with the support of FCDO, we see that there is an open, kind of like conversations and discussions on issues that emerge during our implementations. So because of the regular meeting and conversation, we can pick up and open to those discussions and also make some adjustment where needed. Another added value that we actually engaging in FCDO funded is also open up our engagement with the British Embassy in Cambodia, so we can have a broader engagement and support and working closely with the embassy here in the country. Despite on that, we also kind of like learn, with a close working relationship, we also kind of like develop the capacity of ourselves in bringing the program like quality programming and the impacts to the life of the community, especially the women and children that we provide the support. However, we also observe some challenges as well because, the operational system of the FCDO fund is somehow quite strict, and also the report requirement and deadlines also to some extent, despite we are very, very kind of like engaging closely, but sometimes it also feel kind of like discouraging and also disempowerment as well. And we hope that we could in some way to support more kind of like local led development and also self-defined agenda, and also especially in terms of time frame, because the work on the ground is quite challenging, so we hope to kind of like explore more how do we do best in terms of setting the time frame reporting requirement that's suitable to the context, especially when we are working with the grassroots and civil society organization on the ground. Thank you.
Channsitha, I'm going to have to be mean. We're quite pushed for time. So if I could ask you to do slightly quicker answers, both you and the other panellists, because we really want to get to the second panel. Parliamentary business has changed, so we're right up against it on the time.
Very briefly, you touched it, but what else would you like to see from the FCDO in this regard? What else?
So in terms of what we would like to see in terms of, from FCDO, I think the support so far is really kind of like great. However, we hope that the fund and the support is going to be kind of like long-term, flexible, and multi-years funding, and also kind of like allow for self-determined priority, especially for the civil societies and women's rights organization on the ground. Second is to kind of like simplify the funding requirement. We hope that while ActionAid Cambodia working together with ActionAid UK to create a possibility for the women's rights organization and civil society, but also, if the civil society organization can access direct funding from FCDO, that would be going to be great. But then, it need to simplify the funding requirement and also reduce the bureaucracy in terms of timeline and the deadlines and other kind of like strict compliant if possible, and create more kind of like space for bringing what might be work best on the ground in the context where FCDO work in partnerships, for example, like in Cambodia. Another point is kind of like building meaningful and long-term partnership with civil society, where the voices of civil society is also reflected in the grant making and also grant implementation, which is I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of like being one of the witnesses to speak to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Yes, Tanko, can I begin with you and ask how have cuts to the UK ODA budget affected the delivery of your services?
Thank you. I think we've been affected in a number of ways. The first has been the predictability of funding. That for most of the funding that we access through the High Commission or through FCDO Ghana, they may be multi-year, but the release of the funds, is on a yearly basis. And usually by the time you go through the discussions, arrangements, and then you sign the agreement, you are around August, and then by the end of March, you have to wrap up, and then wait for the next funding cycle or release. And that really affects work because it's stop and go, etc. And I think that is something that has really affected our work. I think the second is in terms of the scope of work. That's for the support to be meaningful, to achieve sustainable results, to help address the drivers of exclusion and poverty. You need long-term, multi-year funding, such as what happened under the Star Ghana program, where DFID led in mobilizing support with other donors, the EU, Danida, and USAID, and provided 10 years of support to civil society in Ghana, managed through a grant mechanism. But at least, organizations were assured of support over a period of time around a program of work that ensured an integrated approach to addressing these issues. So that's also one of the areas where the cuts have affected us. And of course, in terms of the areas of support, it used to be quite broad. Now we've narrowed down to delivery of services, particularly to women and girls, and then, private sector development. But I think issues around climate change, issues around governance, underpin all these challenges that we are trying to address. And therefore, when we narrow to just 2 or 3 key areas, it becomes quite problematic. But I'm happy that the white paper has, spoken about climate change, has spoken about, voice, fighting exclusion and poverty. And we hope to see that these are reflected in the kinds of areas that FCDO actually supports on the ground. Over.
Yeah. Well, I think you've answered my next question to you, which was going to be what were the challenges of FCDO's current duration of project cycles. But I think you've given an answer in that in relation to the on-off difficulties that creates for your organisation. So, Sita, can I ask you, what are the risks to your programmes of UK ODA levels remaining low?
Could I have the question clarified again, please?
Yes. What are the risks to your programmes of the UK ODA levels remaining low? That is, are your programmes at risk in the future if the level of money from the FCDO remains at its current level?
Thank you. Thank you for additional clarification. Yes, because indeed, when it comes to kind of like supporting the community, it takes time, and especially when we look at in terms of transformative impact change the life of the community that we are working with. So it's required. We can see that the work, the support of FCDO is continuations from the our previous and work on the ground. So it's kind of like it's built on the existing work, and then it's added values to the strengthening the capacity and the leaderships, and especially the collective leaderships of women, to kind of like respond to the climate crisis, and also the impacts on their life and their community and their natural resources, and also their role in terms of building the resilient and alternative livelihood. So if the support is getting kind of like low and not able to continue for the long term, the challenge perhaps would be around how the impact will be sustained, and the work on the ground also level ups to a policy and sustainable change at the national level, also perhaps contributing to the international and global level as well.
Yes, well, I think you have also answered the next question, because that was to be how could your programs benefit from guaranteed long-term funding. But I think, Sita, you've just set that out. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Theo, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Tanko, if I could ask you, Ghana, I understand, may soon introduce a bill that will largely criminalise openly identifying as LGBT in Ghana. So can I ask specifically, how is the FCDO working with you, and particularly other civil society organisations, on this major change in circumstances?
Thank you very much. FCDO has not worked, or is not working directly with us on the bill. But what's happening is that the civil society organizations in Ghana have organized, those that are interested in, engaging with government and with the media on the issue, have organized into coalitions and alliances that they're using to engage with various stakeholders around the bill, particularly the aspects of the bill that criminalizes, not just people's sexuality, but also the right to associate, which are guaranteed in the Constitution, the right to engage with others, on the basis of common association, organization, etc. The limitations to speech, and even the targeting of organizations that may be providing support, to organizations of persons, identified under the bill as not acceptable, so to speak. And so that's how we've been doing, but directly we have not engaged with FCDO on this. They may have engaged behind the scenes with government or with the church, the religious organizations, but not directly with civil society.
Thank you. On the specific example of the LGBT legislation or potential legislation, how does that in practice work? Was that activists that came to you and alerted you to it? Was it your organisation that went out to the community and said, this is something that we're concerned about, what do you think? How is that relationship?
Well, I mentioned that earlier, that Star Ghana Foundation, my organisation, arose out of a 10-year program of support that DFID provided to civil society in Ghana, managed by the Star Ghana program. So under the program, there were already discussions around how the program could support organizations of LGBTQ persons without, falling foul of the law, because at that time, even though there was no law, but the media, had whipped everybody into a frenzy, and it became quite difficult to openly undertake advocacy actions. So what we did at that time was really to work with these organizations, but around the provision of social services, that would then provide, entry points for discussions on the issues of the freedom of association and etc. When the bill was introduced, a number of the members of our board, and they are now called I think the famous 8 or the Big 8, they kind of mobilized and decided to fight the bill as individuals, who are an association of individuals rather than under the banner of Star Ghana. There are some other organizations such as the Center for Democratic Development, CDD, that have come out openly taking a stance on this issue. So what we are doing now is providing support, to the advocacy actions, providing support to research, that seeks to provide counter arguments or narratives to what is being projected or put out by the proponents of the bill and the religious organizations.
And the UK government has always, in my opinion, been very proactive and supportive around human rights, civil rights, and particularly LGBT+Q rights. So whilst you're not getting any funding for this programme, do you still have a close working relationship with the FCDO team on this?
Yes, we've had discussions, but not specifically on the bill. I think it's the issue, I don't know, but I'm just assuming that perhaps it is more in terms of consulting, and we've had a number of discussions at the instance of the High Commissioner that have discussed various issues, including the bill and what civil society could do, in terms of first advocacy against the signing of the bill into an act, but then also what do we do once the act comes into force and it criminalizes even organizations that seek to provide support or speak on behalf, of LGBTQ persons and their organizations.
Thank you very much. Thank you for you. That was all the questions I had for that panel. In that case, Nadine, could I come to you? We're watching with horror around the conflict in your region more broadly. But what effect has the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo had on civil society organisations?
Thank you. I think the majority of people who are living in the DRC cannot really, make the difference when they see civil society, as far as they're concerned. They are representative of a particular government. And what is going on is because the country has been at war for a long time, people are enabled to actually, be able to see the advantage of what actually impactful, how that work is. And I think that also one thing that is also contributing to the problem is the fact that in my country, especially in the eastern part, people are reported to have companies, private company, who seems to be contributing to the problem, the fact that they are accused of exploiting people who are living in the region. So what that has done is that when people are delivering particular projects, they cannot make a difference. And, I'm speaking more from a perspective of a survivor, and I meet a lot of survivors, a different platform. And I remember in December asking, a group of survivors who came from the DRC to a conference in the USA, and we were talking about, how the crime of sexual violence is being perpetrating, and the majority will say you that I can't make a difference to, whether the civil society is doing the work or whether they are also part of the people who are committing the crime. I think that there has been a lot of confusions, my country obviously being at war and suffering at multi-level, on one way, people see how the resources are being abused and being taken, but on the other hand, we seem to have peacemaker, but they are not really protecting the people who are there. You cannot deliver, peace if people see those who are coming to help them, as being part of the group that are causing the problem. And you would have seen, some of the civil society group, being attacked or even though they are doing great work, being targeted because the population cannot see the difference. And I think that, it just prevents in the way that those who genuinely, mean to do the work and actually help the population. And that is why, for me, I think I wanted to emphasize on really the importance of when we are, providing help, in a recipient country, we want to be perceived to be leading, but not only leading because we are handing in money, but also because we are actually, promoting the value that we set abroad, but people can actually see that, even if somebody is from a civil society and they happen to be part of the people who are committing the crime, they can actually also be held accountable the same way as a citizen of that country would have, be treated. So it's still tough, but I do understand that, my country is very chaotic, and there are a lot of civil society organizations who have been able to help the population that are, actually being dispersed. There are, I know, civil society helping. I'm really, talking in the context of sexual violence. Children, born of war, who have been able, because of the funding, to be helped to know how to cope, with the issue of having a child born of war. And as we're talking about civil society, I think it's very important that we don't forget that there are also survival-led organizations, people who themselves have really suffered the crime, but have taken up on the experiences of the user experience to really help other women, and young girls and boys who have suffered the horrific crime and really have taken initiative. And I think that sometimes when we're talking about civil society, we have often, and this is what they've often said, we have often, forgot to mention and recognize that their work is also as valuable. And, with really little resources, they are also able to really do great work and, empower, if not, help, other survivors. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine, for raising the importance of survivor-led networks. You're absolutely right. To have that authenticity is vital. Could I just pull you back on something that you were saying, though? Maybe I've misunderstood. Were you saying in the DRC there are organisations that are effectively camouflaging themselves as civil society, or to get money, or are you saying that the public doesn't understand the difference between a civil society organisation and one that's doing it for financial benefit or ill intent?
Yeah, I think, well, I wouldn't really say people are camouflaging because I don't, I have no evidence of that. But what we have seen is, I get asked when I'm speaking to people, people know I do my campaign here in the UK. And then, they say, just don't mention, they're just the same, we don't know who is who. There has been incidents where, there has been people from civil society who have committed crime against, civilian in the DRC. But we know they have not been able to be held accountable to that. This has created, it doesn't mean that everybody is the same. There is an issue of accountability, but there's also a funding distribution. The reason why I wanted to bring the example of survival-led organization is you probably know they don't get the same exposure. They are not the big NGO that will have direct link, with the FCDO. And quite often, if any grassroots organization can get a little funding, that would be via another probably civil organization that is, linked to with FCDO. So this is already creating a conflict. The reason why there is a trust issue is because the population has seen, people from civil society being part of, activity that have also contributed to the problem. So what that means, it prevents, when somebody means well to actually acknowledge. It created trust issues, Having said that, I do recognize that civil organizations are also, there are genuine organizations who are playing a key role. I've not been to the DRC since, but I've seen in Sudan, I've had an opportunity to work with an organization that is funded by the FCDO, who is doing work in Sudan. And I have seen how, vital the work was. If not, I would have, wished they had more funding to carry that work. Even so, they had to work with a grassroots organization, but this grassroots organization did not have the linkage with FCDO. But it was through this organization that they were able to reach the survival network. So these are the challenges that I'm just trying to highlight. Yeah,
it's really helpful, and this is our first session, so if there was more that you wanted to write in on that, or if other people wanted to give us evidence, because I think it comes to the heart of it around the trust, the credibility, the authenticity, the transparency, things that we're battling with across the all of the development sector, but even more acute when it becomes a conflict situation, and some seek to weaponise the very sort of kindness and generosity of others. So thank you for raising that. Panel, I'm afraid we're going to have to end your session here. But this is the beginning of the conversation that we're having, so please do keep in touch with us, and thank you so much for all the evidence that you've given us. It's a great start, and so thank you all very much. And I'd like to invite the second panel if they can join us. I know that Rowan, you're physically in the room, and I've now got Nana and Andrew. I can see you there as well. So, Nana, I wonder, would you mind introducing yourself and your organisation to us, please?
Thank you very much. So my name is Nana Afadzinu. I'm the Executive Director of WACSI, the West Africa Civil Society Institute. It's a capacity development institute primarily for civil society in West Africa. We are also an organization that is very active on the discussions around shifting power and within the international development space, and looking at the issue around localization. So we actually host the Reimagining the INGO project, which is a global project. And we have worked with Bond to engage civil society, consult civil society in a number of countries, around the world, to look at FCDO civil society engagement. So yeah, that's WACSI. Thank you.
Well, we're a committee that's also very engaged in localism and shifting power, so hopefully you've seen some of the work we've done on it, and thank you very much for being a voice for that. But I don't think you're going to be alone on this panel. Rowan, tell us about you and who you're representing today.
Hi, I'm Rowan Popplewell, and I'm a policy manager at Bond, which is the UK network for organisations working in international development.
Thank you very much. And Andrew.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Firmin. I'm Editor-in-Chief at CIVICUS, the Global Civil Society Alliance, where I co-lead our research work. So CIVICUS is a membership network that supports and tries to strengthen citizen engagement and civil society around the world, and defend and expand civic space.
Thank you very much. Theo.
Thank you. Nana, if I could ask you first, what do you think is the biggest driver of the shrinking of civil space globally? What's your assessment, and what do you think is the biggest driver?
Oh, Nana, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are a number of reasons. One of them is the geopolitical developments that we are having globally now. We seem to be having a lot more support for right-wing populist governments, and these are governments that are not necessarily supportive of human rights. Rather would push towards trade, look at security issues. And so issues around widespread civic space, enabling that kind of engagement and open society, is under threat. And that is one of the reasons. And so you have a number of governments that have come into power that do not support these open society ideals and are therefore constraining the space for civil society to engage. And those in countries that may have, because of political pressure and wanting to be politically correct, would have told the line of human rights and enabling civic space to be open, no longer have that pressure, because you have this multipolar world that we currently live in. So that's one. Secondly is the fact that over the years, civil society, particularly in the global south, have not been supported to have strong institutions. They have mainly worked on projects. And so you have a largely weakened civil society space. Thirdly, you also have things that are happening like technology, new things that we are now in the fourth industrial revolution with technology. And speaking again from the perspective of the Global South, a number of organizations that have to really engage these new technology to be very effective in the space have not had access, or there's no affordability. And so these new developments have also affected the way that civil society has engaged. So these are different aspects of the things. And finally, let me add that civil society itself in our different countries, and I'm speaking now from West Africa, because people seem to be disillusioned with democracy, and the fact that they don't see democracy having given them anything, any dividends. You actually have citizens who sometimes, when these authoritarian governments, military coups take over, actually support it because they see that they think that democracy and elected governments have failed them. And you have civil society organizations that are pushing for democracy. So in a sense, we are caught between the rock and the hard place sometimes. So these are all some of the different things that are constraining the civic space.
Thank you, Nana. And Andrew, can I ask you specifically, what do you believe that the FCDO can do to help address the problem that Nana's just outlined?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that the issue of restricted civic space needs to be mainstreamed in all of FCDO's responses. So it isn't just about providing support to civil society for funding or whatever, or holding dialogues with civil society. It's in every engagement with both civil society and with other states to mainstream issues of civic space, to express concern through diplomatic channels to governments that are restricting civic space, to dedicate funding specifically to enabling civil society organizations and networks to resist the restriction of civic space and to actively defend civic space. It's allyship as well. It's being prepared to speak out when, for example, civil society activists are detained or jailed, being prepared to speak out publicly. And one other thing is modeling exemplary behavior domestically. So practicing the respect for civic space at home, so you don't help create international norms of restriction of civic space. I think these are all important part of the responsibility, not just for FCDO, but for any of the big global north states that provide ODA.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rowan, I wonder if you can give us your assessment of civil society, civil spaces now globally, and if the FCDO's shift from sort of going from dispersing grants to giving now sort of contracts for programs, is that making any difference to how civil society is flourishing?
I'll separate the two. So I think when it comes to civic space globally, thanks to the work of CIVICUS, we've got really good data that shows the extent of the restrictions that are spreading globally. We know that it's a very established trend, it's sustained, and it's in different regions around the world. And we've also seen the UK being downgraded on the CIVICUS monitor as well. So it's even in countries here too. With regards to contracts, this is something that we've seen the FCDO shift towards, is the use of contracts over grants, and I don't believe that it's something that particularly helps with civic space, because what we hear time and again from activists, from human rights defenders, from civil society organisations is that they need direct funding from governments like the FCDO. And if you are providing funding through contracts, that's not going directly to the organisation. It's going to private sector companies who manage these big sort of consortia, and smaller organisations who are often the ones who are most at risk of restrictions just aren't the ones who are receiving this funding, so it's not going to them. And the other problem with contracting is what you tend to see is the FCDO sort of coming up with the problem and defining it in their own terms, and then contracting out to organisations to provide services to meet that problem. Whereas, what we're seeing with civic space is organisations needing sort of direct, sustainable, long-term funding that enables them to flourish and to respond to the problems that they face on the ground, and to identify the problems that they see. And grants is the only way to deal with that. Contracts isn't going to help.
And I think it was Nadine in the last panel was saying that there was an issue around sort of credibility. So the big organisations get the FCDO contracts, so they're seen as sort of legitimate and trustworthy. But when they're subcontracting it down to the grassroots, they haven't got that badge of authenticity. Is that a thing that you recognise?
I'm not sure about that, but I mean, what we do know is that as the money goes further and further down the chain, there's less and less of it that gets to organisations at the grassroots. And if we want to see a move towards more locally led development, which is something that the FCDO is committed to, and I think is fundamentally has to be part of the response to closing civic space globally, then we need to see more money going directly to these organisations. And I think that may well help with authenticity as well, but I can't speak to that directly.
Andrew, what are your thoughts around the whole FCDO and the way that they're operating and trying to support civil society?
Yeah, I think there is something to be said. I think your last question expresses the truth, and as Rowan put it, the further down you get, the less money there is. Generally, I mean, not just speaking again for the about the actions of the FCDO, but donors more generally. There are parts of the world where the organisations that stand up for democracy and human rights have simply given up trying to access ODA because the transaction costs are too high. They don't have the time to invest in that. They know that larger organisations are going to attract the funding. So yeah, there's just not enough localisation all around, and that's already we know that hardly any ODA that goes directly to Global South civil society organisations. And if you look at the DAC members, it's about 10% of the ODA provided goes directly to Global South organisations. And the UK is absolutely on that average. UK is 10.6% on the latest figures. So, and then we know that very little gets outside capitals, very little gets to other locales. So yeah, I mean, I think there are problems all down the chain.
Thank you. And Nana, I wonder, sort of on the ground, do people feel listened to, empowered? How is civil society surviving?
Well, I think that what is happening now is that there's a lot of discussion around how do we make sure that we change the way international development works, which has really, for a long time, when it comes to engaging organizations in the Global South, seen them as risky, not trustworthy, organizations that you really have to keep on a short leash. And so that really impacts the way the organizations are engaged with, both by the bilaterals like the FCDOs and also even by organizations, big organizations, the INGOs that they work with, and this permeates through in different ways in the way they work. So right now, there's pushback, but there's also advocacy, also by INGOs, and even there's also interest. And WACSI is part of a program that FCDO is running with Star Ghana and other organizations in Malawi and Zambia and Comic Relief on shifting the power. And so there's that interest to really change the way this partnership works. And that means the how we work with each other. So the way grants making is done, the way we have discussions and agree on measurements of success, the length of the grants that are given, the way we do monitoring, evaluation, and learning, the way we assess risk, you know, and address the issues of risk and compliance. And so in a sense, there is some work that is going on, but the status quo hasn't changed much. And so we still have, you know, many civil society organizations who are facing complex funding processes. You have challenges, limited access to information, you know, when you are engaging, the way the risk and due diligence approach, which is instead of being one that is supportive, seems more like, you know, one that is policing. You know, the fact that you have, and a number of the speakers earlier spoke about it, project-specific funding, sometimes even co-financing or saying pre-finance, and then we would give you the funding when the work has been done, which for smaller organizations is very challenging. Even the way we have, you know, when you have complex funding processes, you don't have the kind of systems that bigger, more resourced organizations would have. And so for smaller organizations who want to engage, you know, and be effective in the work that they do, it places them at a disadvantage.
Thank you.
So these are some of the things.
Let me bring Rowan in. Rowan, what do you hope to see in the forthcoming Open Societies strategy?
Well, we know that the restriction of civic space is something that's happening globally, it's systemic, and therefore countries like the UK and our allies, we need to have a strategic response to that. The strategy has to be fully funded, it has to be cross-departmental, it's got to be gender sensitive, but also it needs to be structured around goals, and it needs to have indicators so that we can measure its progress, and we can measure impact, but we can also hold the FCDO accountable, and that's something that we really need to see from the strategy. It's got to have a strong focus on civic space, on civil society, on human rights defenders, and set out how the FCDO is going to work with those organisations, particularly those who are at risk, to support them to do their work effectively. And we want to see it set out things like how it's going to fund civil society properly. It's got to be locally led, so therefore it has to reach across to the locally led strategy that they're talking about as well. We want to see a clear approach to protection and rapid response mechanisms, and then also look at how it's going to use all the levers in its sort of diplomatic network to help respond to the challenge of closing space.
Thank you. Order. We now have to close this session. Thank you so much. I'm deeply sorry. Are we off mic?
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.